A conspiracy theorist claims that the moon is not a mere star, but a megastructure with a power core, driven by AI. The story opens with astronauts Brian, Marcus, and Jocinda are in an outer space mission to repair a satellite. While they are at it, the systems start going off and something weird happens. A strange metallic black swarm hovers around and hits the shuttle, with Jocinda losing her consciousness by getting it and Marcus losing control, and the tether gets cut. Brian tries to get hold of him, however, he is unable to do so and loses him ultimately. As Brian re-enters the shuttle, he tries to contact Marcus, but the connections seem down. Brian tries to find his way back to Earth. Meanwhile, the swarm enters a deep hole in the moon. After successfully landing the shuttle on Earth, he is considered as a great man for his deeds. After the investigation that followed for a year and a half, his story becomes too hard to believe, and Jocinda is also not able to defend him since she was unconscious the whole time. NASA resorts with the solution that the incident was caused by human error. They further fire Brian, after which he loses almost everything he had. His wife Brenda takes his son Sonny and moves to her mother's house while Brian is left alone. The scene shifts to 10 years later. A man named Casey Houseman, working as a janitor in the University of California, sneaks into the professor's office to get access to data stored in professor's computer. Furthermore, he calls Chile's National Observatory to ask for a file that stores tracking of moon's orbit details while pretending to be the professor. He asks them to send the details to his personal mail. He then goes back to his second job where he barely works and starts analyzing the details the observatory has sent him. The details prove his theory that the moon's orbit is coming quite closer to Earth. He tries to contact NASA with a false name, but nothing seems to work. Meanwhile, Jocinda is asked to come early to the Space Center, so she rushes over after checking up on her family. At the Space Center, she is informed that the moon's orbit has shifted and the satellite has picked up from strange movements of an unknown source coming out of a hole in the moon's crater. The scene shifts to Casey, who is overwhelmed by everything since his findings don't go anywhere. He then notices a newspaper and gets to know that it's Astronaut Day at the museum. Thinking that he still has a chance, quickly prints out his research papers and heads out. He finds a group of students on a school trip who are here for a lecture from Brian. They mistakenly approach Casey and he gets a chance to pass his theories, where he states that the moon is actually an artificial megastructure which was built by aliens to keep a close eye on the Earth. Brian, on the other hand, is asleep, and when he is woken up by his landlord asking for rent, he escapes through the window. He meets Casey, who explains his theory to Brian, but he does not believe a single word and kicks out Casey. Casey throws his research papers at Brian, who leaves them in the trash. Later, Brenda calls Brian to turn on the news channel. His Sonny is being chased by the police on account of high speeding. At the trial, Brian ruins the whole thing by constantly interrupting the judge and lying to defend his son. The situation gets worse since the judge postpones the trial and sends Sonny to jail. Jocinda Casey visits his mother at the retirement home. He tells her that nobody is listening to him. His mother tries to cheer him up. Back in the NASA office, Jocinda shows some recent discoveries to Deputy Director Albert Hutchings. The moon, as seen, has entered an elliptical orbit, and around 3 weeks it will fall on Earth. Jocinda suggests that they should analyze the situation by launching a mission, but the means to achieve it does not seem adequate. All the fellow members of the center are asked to stay quiet until a probable solution is found. However, an anonymous source has already leaked the information. People have started to evacuate the city. Brian then learns about the situation from the press release, where Albert announces that they will be sending a lunar recon mission. There's absolutely no reason to panic since the situation can be in control. NASA launches SLS Block 2 to investigate the abnormalities. The whole media constructs way too many stories about megastructures and secrets kept from people. Brian is shocked and goes back to the museum to retrieve the papers Casey left him and finds his whereabouts. He learns about an emergency meeting. The NASA shuttle lands at the moon. While investigating the crater deeply, the shuttle surprisingly starts coming back up. Soon, the black swarm comes out of the crater, engulfing the SLS, killing all the astronauts. Brian comes down to a hotel to find Casey, only to be surrounded by conspiracy theorists who seem lacking in what they do. He takes Casey to a restaurant to have a clear conversation with him. He asks how Casey knew about this before NASA did. Casey replies that he has been studying about megastructures created by aliens for years and was shocked to find that moon was one of them. He further explains that a megastructure has a rigid shell around a power core and something is definitely off for moon to get off course. The consequences of moon shifting creates havoc on Earth. Coastal cities are terrorized by storms and record tides. Flood has engulfed the whole city. All the members of the meeting are sent upstairs for safety, and Casey barely escapes from falling into the water with Brian helping him. On the other hand, Jocinda and Albert analyze the swarm, concluding that it shows evidence of intelligence, so it is an AI model. Earth is not ready to deal with such consequences with minimal resources. Terrorized by the situation and unable to decide further, Albert signs off his position, making Jocinda the next deputy director. He asks her to look for all the information herself. Searching for some answers, Jocinda comes across some confidential information and footage of her previous mission, showing the same swarm that attacked the SLS. A former NASA official, Holden Field, approaches her. He explains that when Apollo 11 landed on the moon in 1969, the connection was cut off with the mission control for some minutes. Although the reality rests in the fact that the control was cut off knowingly, so the truth about an unknown strange pulsating light from beneath the moon's crust can be a forever confidential truth restricted to the walls of the center. The technology required to deal with such energy has not been developed by any sources on Earth yet. The only thing they could do was launch a military program named Zulu X-Ray 7, which was again shut down due to budgetary reasons. Jocinda contacts the military officers for help, but they turn her down, saying that the mission is hence in their hands. She tries to convince her ex-husband, General Doug Davidson, that sending nukes will never help relieve the situation, rather it will only be terrible for humans since a global fallout might occur. Later, Brian and Casey are picked up by the military helicopter. They meet Jocinda, who further explains the situation. Casey admits that he was the one who leaked the information online. Jocinda recruits Brian since he is the only astronaut to land a shuttle with no power. Brian accepts the offer on the condition that his son must be released from the jail and should be brought to the station for safety. The team settle for the conditions. The mission starts right there. They retrieve an old shuttle from the museum to transport the EMP. On the other hand, conditions get worse as natural calamities take the shape of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Although it doesn't make sense because Moon does not have enough gravitational pull for natural calamities to happen in such an intensity. Casey's megastructure theory is hence proved rather slowly. Brian takes some instructions from the military to detonate the EMP while also asking them to make sure that they will be having a navigator doing the calculations without the help of any electricity. They will only rely on their thrusters to land. Just then, the earthquake damages the shuttle, and since they are missing an engine, now they won't be able to launch. Jocinda thanks everyone and asks them to leave so they can spend their final moments with their family. Everyone leave the base while Jocinda notices that Casey is still doing some calculations. He concludes that the moon's gravity will stand at over 80% of the Earth's pull. If they launch the shuttle right when the moon is above Earth, they can use the gravitational pull of the moon to launch the shuttle as the extra boost they need for the broken engine. With Brian as the pilot, Jocinda navigating the shuttle, and Casey doing the calculations when the electronics are cut off, they move forward with their plans at the very last minute. Before the force could engulf the shuttle, Brian pushes it far off into the atmosphere, enough to make the moon's pull to attract the shuttle and take it off the Earth. They take fuel from another satellite while Casey keeps taking pictures to celebrate. The moon keeps getting closer and they need to hurry. Somehow, Brian manages to manually activate the thrusts for the shuttle to reach the moon. On the other hand, the boys are stopped midway by some armed men who rob them, taking away their phones and other valuables. They will need another car to proceed, so Sonny takes them to his mother's house. The weather is so unstable and the debris have started falling. The boys have to wait and take shelter in a shack. As the shuttle moves towards Moon, Brian leaves in a rover with the EMP, activates the electronics and sets up. However, to everyone's surprise, the swarm starts following the shuttle instead of the rover. Thinking that the EMP controller might be getting its attention, Brian destroys it. However, it doesn't help. The swarm comes closer, intending to swallow the ship. Brian realizes it's because of Casey's phone, so he destroys it and the swarm goes away. Jocinda realizes it's programmed to seek organic matter in an electronic environment. They will have to reach the moon and they only have 2 hours. Otherwise, the military will conclude that the mission was unsuccessful and will launch their nukes. The scene shifts to the space, where after retrieving the EMP, the shuttle flies inside the moon's crater. Here Casey's theory is proved as they find that the moon is actually a megastructure with a power core. The team gets ready to throw the EMP at the swarm, but just then, the shuttle starts moving on its own. Suddenly a door opens and a bright light is seen. It takes them inside before the swarm could attack them. The shuttle destroys, and the three of them fall unconscious. The shuttle door opens and the light scans them. The mission has taken way too long, and the military assumes that the plan has failed and get ready to launch the nukes. Sonny and his family, on the other hand, try to escape through the irresistible weather and the chasers who are constantly firing at them. Fiercely moving forward, they get a call from Doug saying that he has to stay for the nukes launch, so they will have to find their own shelter. The atmosphere is losing its oxygen and the living beings fall dead gradually. The family puts on the oxygen masks to save themselves as they start walking to find a shelter. Meanwhile, Jocinda and Casey wake up only to discover that they stand in a place with gravity and can breathe. Brian is missing. A door opens and they enter inside. Jocinda is of the opinion that there might be two entities existing in here, one of which might be helping them. Brian, on the other hand, is connected to an unknown entity. He is surrounded by a white light and an unknown force taking the shape of his son. He tries to communicate with Brian, explaining that billions of years ago, human ancestors lived on a much farther planet with an advanced technology that is far more better than the existing energies on Earth. When the AI they developed turned against them, it turned into swarms made of nanotechnology and destroyed the natural environment of the planet. The remaining humans tried to escape in vessels like moons so they can find a new place to environment to reside in. Earth was the only viable source of life. The AI asks Brian to distract the swarms away from the core so the moon can return to its orbit. Just then, Brian comes back to Jocinda and Casey. Brian explains the whole situation and they head off towards the shuttle, which was fixed by AI. The upgraded EMP has been provided, which is powerful enough to destroy the swarm. Only 10 minutes are left before the nukes are launched, and Brian seems to have a plan in mind. Back on Earth, one of Tom's daughter is out of oxygen. When Tom notices, he gives off his oxygen tank to her and asks to move forward even if he doesn't follow her. As she disappears into the mist, we see Tom collapsing due to loss of oxygen, ultimately losing his life. The daughter reunites with the family. Sonny decides to search for him but instead gets trapped in a falling debris. Michelle finds him struggling under a tree. She manages to get him out and they run back to Brenda. The whole city is falling through a huge mess. The moon's pressure has collapsed the whole city. Looking at the situation, the military base decides to launch the nukes, but Doug stands against it, trusting his wife. But soon enough, the base is destroyed by a falling debris. On the moon, Brian tries to make the swarm follow them inside the tunnel. He asks Casey to get the EMP ready in the rover while he plans to stay behind in the rover to lure the swarm, which will follow the rover when he detects a living entity there. Jocinda is against the decision and argues. Just then, Casey takes the charge and locks himself in the rover with the EMP. He says his goodbyes and asks Brian to tell his mother that he was a brave hero. Brian calls him doctor out of respect. The swarm ultimately swallows the rover and Casey makes sure to detonate the EMP once it is deep inside the swarm, ultimately killing it. As the swarm is destroyed, Jocinda lands the shuttle on Earth safely on the surface of the Earth, which was easier, given that the moon was so close to the Earth. Jocinda and Brian finally get out of the shuttle only to find the whole city destroyed and totally covered with snow. Military helicopters pick them up and soon, they reunite with their families. In the final scenes, Casey finds himself talking to the AI, which has now taken the shape of his mother. The AI explains that it has stored a copy of Casey's consciousness and now he is totally a part of the moon and will be helping to rebuild the AI to build a better future.